The August sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus Johnson hefted another box from the moving truck, his police academy t-shirt dark with sweat. At 42, his athletic build made the physical work manageable, but after 3 hours of moving, even his well-maintained muscles were starting to protest. He paused for a moment on the cobblestone driveway of his new home, a stately Victorian in Boston's prestigious Oakwood Heights, and allowed himself a small smile. 20 years of service, countless overtime shifts, and unwavering dedication had finally led to this moment, not just the house, but the position that made it possible. As the city's newly appointed chief of police, he'd earned every inch of this 3,000-square-foot dream. Behind the immaculate white curtains of the house next door, Karen Weber's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her morning coffee cup. Her pale blue eyes narrowed as she watched the scene unfold. In her 15 years as the neighborhood watch coordinator, she'd developed what she called a sixth sense for anything out of place in Oakwood Heights. And to her, this definitely qualified as out of place. Harold, she called to her husband, who sat in his leather recliner, more interested in his iPad than her concerns. That man has been going in and out of the Morrisons' old house all morning. I don't recall any sales signs recently. Harold barely glanced up from his screen. Must be the new owner, dear. Martha mentioned at Bridge Club that the house had sold. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her recently refreshed Botox making the expression more severe than intended. In this neighborhood, I find that hard to believe. The Morrisons wouldn't sell to just anyone. This is Oakwood Heights, not some common subdivision. She watched as Marcus carried in another box, this one marked family photos in neat black marker. Something about his confident movements, the casual way he entered and exited the house, made her even more suspicious. In Karen's mind, people like that didn't just move into Oakwood Heights without proper vetting by the neighborhood association of which she was, of course, the vice president. I should call the police, she declared, already reaching for her phone, just to be safe. You can never be too careful these days. Harold lowered his iPad slightly. Karen, maybe you should. But she had already pulled up the non-emergency number, her French-tipped nails tapping against the screen with practiced efficiency. In her mind, she was simply doing her duty as a concerned citizen, protecting the prestigious reputation of Oakwood Heights. After all, that's what made their neighborhood special, their vigilance, their standards, their exclusivity. Little did Karen Weber know, her next actions would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of her carefully maintained world and force her to confront truths she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Over the past decade, Karen Weber had earned a reputation among the local police dispatch operators. Though never explicitly discussed, her name in the caller ID often elicited knowing sighs. Last summer, she'd called about a suspicious Hispanic landscaper who turned out to be working for her next-door neighbor. In spring, she'd reported a threatening group of black teenagers who were selling Girl Scout cookies. 3 months ago, she'd demanded police intervention when an Asian family was taking photos of a house for sale, claiming they were casing the neighborhood. Each time, she'd defended her actions with practiced phrases better safe than sorry, and just doing my civic duty. The responding officers had learned to approach her calls with skepticism, but protocol demanded they investigate each report. Meanwhile, Marcus Johnson's career told a different story. His office walls still packed in boxes marked Chief S office displayed commendations for community outreach, medals for valor, and photographs with 3 different mayors. He'd worked his way up from beat cop to detective, then lieutenant, and finally to chief through a combination of exceptional police work and an uncanny ability to bridge divides between law enforcement and communities. The promotion announcement had made headlines. Boston PD appoints first black police chief. Marcus had mixed feelings about the focus on his race rather than his qualifications, but he understood the significance. His late wife Sarah, before cancer took her 5 years ago, had always told him that sometimes being first meant carrying extra weight on your shoulders. The first confrontation came on Marcus's 3rd day in the neighborhood. He was checking his mailbox, wearing running shorts and a Harvard Law sweatshirt, a souvenir from his daughter's college, when Karen approached, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced politeness that set Marcus's teeth on edge. "I'm Karen Weber, Neighborhood Watch Coordinator and Vice President of the Oakwood Heights Association. We require all new residents to fill out proper documentation." Marcus turned, maintaining the professional composure that had served him well through 2 decades of law enforcement. "Good morning, Mrs. Weber. I'm Marcus Johnson. I wasn't aware of any required documentation beyond my closing papers." "Well, we have certain standards here," Karen replied, thrust the clipboard forward. "We need references, employment verification, and background check authorization." "I see," Marcus said carefully. "And do all new residents provide this information?" Of course, Karen lied smoothly. "It's standard procedure." "Interesting," Marcus smiled slightly. "Because the Hendersons who moved in last month, lovely couple, I met them at my department's charity gala, mentioned nothing about this procedure." Karen's grip on her clipboard tightened. "Well, obviously there are exceptions. Based on what criteria, Mrs. Weber?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Karen retreated, but the encounter marked the beginning of her campaign of surveillance. Over the next week, Karen's curtains seemed to twitch whenever Marcus was outside. She photographed his visitors, mostly other police officers, helping with the move, and documented his comings and goings in a small notebook. When Marcus had a few colleagues over for a housewarming barbecue, Karen called the police about noise violations at 7:30 p.m. on a Saturday. The neighborhood's reaction to these events split along predictable but complicated lines. The younger families, like the Hendersons and the Patels, were openly welcoming to Marcus. They brought welcome baskets and invited him to their children's birthday parties. Some older residents, friends of Karen, adopted her suspicious attitude, though they expressed it more subtly through cold shoulders and whispered conversations. Harold Weber watched his wife's escalating behavior with growing concern. "Karen," he finally said one evening, "don't you think you're taking this too far? He seems like a perfectly respectable gentleman." "Respectable," Karen scoffed, peering through her curtains as Marcus chatted with the Rodriguez family from 2 doors down. "Do you know he had 6 different cars in his driveway last week? 6. And people coming and going at all hours." "They looked like police officers," Harold noted dryly. "That's what he wants us to think," Karen muttered. The tension reached a new level when Marcus began renovating his home's exterior. Despite obtaining all proper permits, Karen filed complaints with the city about everything from paint colors to the height of his new fence. Each complaint was summarily dismissed, but she persisted. The neighborhood watch meetings, once focused on actual security concerns, became forums for Karen's thinly veiled insinuations about maintaining community standards. Some members stopped attending, uncomfortable with the new tone. Others, particularly newer residents, began challenging Karen's leadership directly. Emily Henderson, a young mother of 2, stood up during one particularly tense meeting. "I think we need to address the elephant in the room," she announced. "Our new neighbor is being harassed, and we all know why. This isn't about community standards, it's about prejudice." The room erupted into heated discussions, with battle lines clearly drawn between those supporting Karen's concerns and those who saw them for what they were. The comfortable bubble of Oakwood Heights' artificial harmony had been pricked, and long-ignored issues were rising to the surface. Through it all, Marcus maintained his dignity and professionalism, though the strain showed in quiet moments. Late at night, he would sit in his home office, looking at a photo of Sarah, and wonder if she would be proud of how he was handling the situation. "Keep your head up," she used to say. "Your dignity is not determined by their prejudice." Little did anyone know, events were about to come to a head in a way that would force the entire community to confront their prejudices and assumptions head-on. The powder keg that Karen Weber had been filling was about to explode, and the fallout would change Oakwood Heights forever. The local police dispatch center had grown wearily familiar with Karen Weber's number over the years. Her calls followed a predictable pattern, always about suspicious individuals who invariably turned out to be people of color going about their daily lives. There was the time she reported a threatening group of black teenagers who were simply selling Girl Scout cookies. Then, the suspicious Latino man who turned out to be her neighbor's licensed contractor. Most recently, she'd called about an Asian family suspiciously photographing houses they were prospective buyers working with a realtor. Each time, Karen defended her actions with the same rehearsed phrases: "better safe than sorry," or "just doing my duty as a concerned citizen." The responding officers had learned to approach her calls with skepticism, but protocol demanded they investigate every report. Marcus Johnson's pathway to becoming Boston's first black police chief told a different story. His career had been built on bridge building and excellence. The evidence filled the moving boxes labeled Chief S Office. Medals for valor, commendations for community outreach, certificates of merit, and photos with 3 different mayors. He'd risen through the ranks from beat cop to detective, then lieutenant, and finally chief through a combination of exceptional police work and an innate ability to connect with people from all walks of life. When the promotion was announced, the headlines had focused heavily on his race. Boston PD makes history with first black police chief. Marcus had mixed feelings about this emphasis rather than his qualifications, but his late wife Sarah had always told him that being first meant carrying extra weight on your shoulders. Before cancer took her 5 years ago, she'd been his strongest supporter and wisest counsel. The inevitable first confrontation with Karen came on Marcus's 3rd day in Oakwood Heights. He was retrieving his mail, wearing running shorts and a Harvard Law sweatshirt, a gift from his daughter's college, when Karen approached with determined steps and a clipboard. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced politeness that Marcus had learned to recognize over his years in law enforcement. "I'm Karen Weber, Neighborhood Watch Coordinator and Vice President of the Oakwood Heights Association. We require all new residents to complete proper documentation." Marcus turned, drawing on 20 years of experience in keeping his voice level during tense situations. "Good morning, Mrs. Weber. I'm Marcus Johnson. I wasn't informed of any required documentation beyond my closing papers." "Well," Karen said, thrusting the clipboard forward, "we have certain standards here. We need references, employment verification, and authorization for a background check." Marcus replied carefully, "And this is required of all new residents." "Of course," Karen said without hesitation. "It's standard procedure." Interesting. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "I recently met the Hendersons at my department's charity gala they moved in last month. They didn't mention anything about this procedure." The clipboard trembled slightly in Karen's hands. "Well, naturally there are certain exceptions. Based on what criteria, Mrs. Weber?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Karen retreated, but this encounter only marked the beginning of her surveillance campaign. Over the next few weeks, Karen's vigilance intensified. Her curtains twitched whenever Marcus was outside. She photographed his visitors, mostly fellow officers, helping with the move, and documented his comings and goings in a small notebook. When Marcus hosted a housewarming barbecue for his colleagues, Karen called in a noise complaint at 7:30 p.m. on a Saturday. The neighborhood's reaction to these events revealed deep divisions. Younger families like the Hendersons and the Pattles welcomed Marcus warmly, bringing welcome baskets and party invitations. Others, particularly Karen's social circle, adopted her suspicious attitude, though they expressed it more subtly through cold shoulders and whispered conversations at neighborhood gatherings. Harold Weber watched his wife's escalating behavior with growing unease. "Karen," he ventured one evening, "don't you think you're taking this too far? He seems like a perfectly respectable gentleman." "Respectable," Karen scoffed, peering through her curtains as Marcus chatted with the Rodriguez family next door. "Did you know he had 6 different vehicles in his driveway last week? 6. And people coming and going at all hours." "They were clearly police officers," Harold pointed out. "That's what he wants us to think," Karen muttered. The tension escalated when Marcus began renovating his home's exterior. Despite having all proper permits, Karen filed complaints with the city about everything from his choice of paint colors to the height of his new fence. Each complaint was dismissed, but she persisted. Neighborhood watch meetings, once focused on legitimate security concerns, became forums for Karen's thinly veiled insinuations about maintaining community standards. Attendance began to drop as members grew uncomfortable with the new tone. Others, particularly younger residents, started openly challenging Karen's leadership. During one particularly tense meeting, Emily Henderson, a young mother of 2, stood up. "We need to address the elephant in the room," she declared. "Our new neighbor is being harassed, and we all know why. This isn't about community standards, it's about prejudice." The room erupted into heated discussions, with clear battle lines drawn between those supporting Karen's concerns and those who saw them for what they were. The comfortable bubble of Oakwood Heights had burst, forcing long-ignored issues to the surface. Through it all, Marcus maintained his composure, though the strain showed in private moments. Late at night, he would sit in his home office, looking at Sarah's photo, wondering if she would be proud of how he was handling the situation. Her words echoed in his mind, "Your dignity is not determined by their prejudice." As tension continued to build, no one realized that events were about to come to a head in a way that would force the entire community to confront their prejudices and assumptions. The powder keg that Karen Weber had been filling was about to explode, and the fallout would change Oakwood Heights forever. The Boston Police Department's dispatch center, the mere sight of Karen Weber's number on caller ID, had become infamous. Dispatcher Jenny Martinez would often mouth "Here we go again" to her colleagues before answering. Over the past year alone, Karen had called 17 times about suspicious individuals, all of whom turned out to be people of color going about their daily business. There was the time she reported a gang gathering that was actually a black church group having a bake sale. Last month, she'd called about an aggressive solicitor who turned out to be the son of a Korean family collecting donations for his Eagle Scout project. 2 weeks ago, she'd reported suspicious photography of homes when an Indian couple was house hunting with their realtor. "I'm just being vigilant," Karen would always insist when confronted. "This is a prestigious neighborhood. We have standards to maintain." Meanwhile, Marcus Johnson's office at police headquarters told a different story through the decorations he was now carefully packing. 20 years of service captured in frames, a Medal of Valor for rescuing 3 children from a burning building, a commendation for excellence in community policing, certificates from 3 mayors thanking him for bridging gaps between law enforcement and minority communities. His most recent addition, the announcement of his appointment as Boston's first black police chief, held a special place. "Your father would have been so proud," his daughter Sophia had said when he got the news. Marcus thought of his late wife Sarah too, how she'd always believed in him, even when he was just a rookie officer with big dreams. Before cancer took her 5 years ago, she'd made him promise to keep pushing forward, to be the change they'd always talked about. The first confrontation with Karen came sooner than Marcus expected. He was getting his mail one morning, wearing running shorts and a Harvard Law sweatshirt, Sophia's graduation gift to him, when Karen approached, clipboard in hand and determination in her step. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone Marcus had heard countless times in his career, the forced politeness that barely masked underlying hostility. "I'm Karen Weber, Neighborhood Watch Coordinator and Vice President of the Oakwood Heights Association." Marcus turned, maintaining the professional composure that had served him well through decades of law enforcement. "Good morning, Mrs. Weber. I'm Marcus Johnson." "We require all new residents to complete proper documentation," she announced, thrust the clipboard forward. "Employment verification, references, background check authorization." "Interesting," Marcus replied calmly. "I wasn't aware of any requirements beyond standard closing documents. Did the Thompsons at number 42 complete these forms when they moved in last month?" Karen's grip on the clipboard tightened. "Well, some residents are pre-verified." "Pre-verified," Marcus let the words hang in the air. "And how exactly is that determination made, Mrs. Weber?" The confrontation set the tone for what followed. Karen's surveillance became constant and obvious. Her curtains moved whenever Marcus stepped outside. She photographed every visitor to his home, documented when his lights went on and off, and even started a spreadsheet of his suspicious activities. When Marcus hosted a welcome dinner for his senior command staff, Karen called in a noise complaint at 7 p.m. on a Saturday. When he had his house painted, she filed 3 separate complaints about color choices with the Homeowners Association. When he installed security camera standard procedure for a police chief's residence, she circulated an email about invasion of privacy. The neighborhood split into factions. Younger families like the Patels and Hendersons brought welcome baskets and openly challenged Karen's behavior at community meetings. Others, particularly Karen's Bridge Club circle, supported her through whispered conversations and pointed social exclusions. Harold Weber watched his wife's crusade with growing concern. "Karen," he ventured one evening, "the man is the city's police chief. Don't you think?" That's what he claims Karen interrupted, not taking her eyes off Marcus's driveway where a police cruiser had just pulled up. "But have you seen how many different cars come and go? And all these people visiting at odd hours? They're police officers, Karen. In uniform. Or people dressed as officers," she muttered, making another note in her surveillance log. "Or people dressed as officers," she muttered, making another entry in her surveillance log. The tension reached a breaking point at the monthly neighborhood watch meeting. Emily Henderson, a young mother of two, stood up during Karen's latest security concerns presentation. "This has to stop," Emily declared. "We all know what's really happening here. Our new neighbor is being harassed because of his race, and it's disgraceful." The room erupted. Mrs. Patterson from number 37 stormed out, declaring the neighborhood was going downhill. The Patels and Hendersons applauded. Karen stood at the podium, face flushed, hands trembling. Through it all, Marcus maintained his composure. At night, looking at Sarah's photo on his desk, he would remember her words. "Sometimes being first means carrying the weight of change on your shoulders." But change was coming to Oakwood Heights, whether Karen Weber was ready or not, and events were about to unfold that would force everyone to confront their prejudices in ways they never expected.